The Venice firework. The sky was painted with a stunning array of colors and shapes, as the annual fireworks festival lit up the dark, starry night over Venice. It was a time of celebration, a time to remember the bravery and heroism of the Venetian soldiers, who fought and won the naval battle against the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century. As the dazzling display of fireworks drew to a close, a young man from another region stood in awe, watching the spectacle with wonder and amazement. It was his first time seeing such a breathtaking sight, and he was mesmerized. Marco had come to Venice for the festival, to escape the monotony of his mundane life, and to seek adventure and excitement, and it was here, amidst the revelry and cheer, that he met her. She was a young woman, her long, dark hair cascading down her shoulders in gentle waves. Her eyes were a deep, dark brown, and her face was etched with a sadness that he couldn't quite understand. He was immediately drawn to her, and he approached her with a friendly smile. "Beautiful fireworks, aren't they?" he said, trying to strike up a conversation. The woman looked at him with a hesitant expression, as if unsure whether to engage in conversation or not. "Yes, they are," she replied softly. He could sense her reluctance, but he was determined to get to know her better. He asked her about her life in Venice, and she told him that she had lived there her whole life. She spoke in a quiet, almost melancholy tone, and he could tell that she had experienced some kind of loss or tragedy in her life. He wanted to know more, but he didn't want to push too hard. Instead, he tried to keep the conversation light and easy, asking her about her favorite foods and music, and what she liked to do in her free time. As the night wore on, they found themselves wandering through the narrow, winding streets of Venice, lost in conversation and laughter. They talked about their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets, and the world seemed to fade away around them. But as the night drew to a close, the woman suddenly became quiet, lost in thought. "I should go," she said softly. "It's getting late." He knew that he didn't want the night to end, but he respected her wishes. He walked her back to her home, watching as she disappeared into the darkness. He couldn't help but feel a sense of longing as he made his way back to his lodging, thinking about the mysterious woman he had just met. As he lay in bed that night, listening to the distant sounds of the festival still echoing through the streets, he couldn't help but wonder what her story was, and what secrets lay hidden beneath her sad, beautiful eyes. When he was about to go to sleep, he was suddenly startled by a deafening roar that shook the building. He looked outside and saw the sky lit up with a bright red glow. Confused and worried, he rushed out to the streets to investigate. To his horror, he discovered that Venice was under attack by foreign invaders. They were ruthless pirates, hired by the Ottoman Empire, who had come to pillage and plunder the city. Amidst the chaos and destruction, Marco couldn't help but think of the woman he had met at the fireworks festival the night before. He didn't even know her name, but he felt a strong urge to find her and ensure her safety. As he ran through the streets, he heard explosions coming from the direction of her house. Fear and worry gripped his heart, and he sprinted towards her home, hoping that he wasn't too late. Marco saw chaos erupting in all directions as he ran through the narrow streets of Venice. People were running in all directions, screaming in horror. Buildings were burning, and the smell of smoke and burning wood filled the air. Despite the danger, Marco continued to run toward the woman's house. His mind was gripped by the fear that she might be hurt, or even worse, dead. He didn't know why he was so attracted to her, but he knew he had to find her. As he turned the corner, he suddenly ran into a group of pirates who were heavily armed and had menacing eyes. Marco tried to avoid them and run the other way, but they were so fast that they surrounded him. "Who are you?" asked one of the pirates, pointing a knife at Marco's neck. "I'm just trying to find a friend," Marco stammered, his heart pounding with fear. The pirates obviously didn't believe what he said, and laughed at him. They were about to attack when suddenly a loud explosion shook the streets. The pirates momentarily lost their minds, and Marco took advantage of the opportunity to flee. As Marco ran, he knew that the cause of the explosion was cannons fired by Venetian soldiers. They were fighting the pirates, but it looked like a losing battle. When he arrived at the woman's house, he saw that it had been hit by a cannonball. The roofs had caught fire, and debris was scattered everywhere. Marco's heart sank, and he feared the worst. He searched through the rubble and debris, and called out to her, but there was no answer. He felt a tiny glimmer of hope when he heard a faint voice. He followed the sound and found the woman lying on the ground, injured and in pain. Marco ran to her side and helped her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his anxiety etched on his face. The woman nodded helplessly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for coming," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. Marco helped the woman to her feet and looked around to find a way to get them out of the danger zone. The male lead quickly took action, grabbing the frightened woman and leading her through the streets to the nearest shelter. They could hear the screams of others and the clash of swords in the distance. However, as they saw so many wounded, she suddenly panicked. She suddenly stopped and turned to face him. Her eyes were filled with sadness and grief. "I have to tell you something," she said in a hushed tone. Marco's heart sank, fearing the worst. "What is it?" he asked, bracing himself for bad news. "I had a husband," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was a soldier, and he was killed in a naval battle with the Ottoman Empire." Marco felt a pang of sympathy for her, knowing firsthand the pain of losing someone you love. Her heart raced as she tried to process the situation. She thought about her dead husband, and the fear that he must have felt during battle, but she couldn't dwell on it for long. The male lead's strong grip on her arm brought her back to the present. "Stay here and stay quiet," he whispered to her. "I'll be right back." He disappeared into the chaos, leaving the woman alone with her thoughts. She tried to focus on her breathing, but the sounds of battle were overwhelming. The crash of cannon fire and the screams of the wounded echoed through the walls. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, the male lead returned. He grabbed the woman and pulled her out of the shelter, guiding her through the streets to a small boat waiting at the dock. They rowed furiously, the male lead's muscles straining. The woman felt her heart rate slowly returning to normal. As they left the city behind, as they paddled away from danger, the woman felt a sense of gratitude towards the man who had saved her. She knew that her inner wounds still ran deep, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. "I never got your name," she said finally, breaking the silence. "It's Marco," he replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Thank you, Marco. I'm Isabella," she whispered. He turned to her and smiled, his eyes shining with warmth. "You're welcome," he said. "I'm just glad I could help." And with that, they continued to row, leaving the chaos and destruction of the pirate attack behind them. As they sat on a tired, shaky boat, Marco realized that he had a deep bond with the woman. He didn't know where their relationship would lead, but he knew he would do anything to protect her from harm. Marco and Isabella arrived safely at a nearby port, where they stayed for a few days to rest and recover from their harrowing escape from Venice. During this time, they grew even closer, sharing stories of their past and getting to know each other better. Isabella couldn't help but feel grateful to Marco for all that he had done for her. She knew that she owed him her life, and she couldn't imagine what would have happened if she had been alone. But despite their connection, Isabella was still haunted by memories of her ex-husband. She wasn't sure if she was ready to move on, even though she knew that Marco was a good man who cared deeply for her. As they said their goodbyes, Isabella couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. She didn't know if she would ever see Marco again, but she wanted to hold on to the hope that they would meet again. "Will you come to the fireworks festival next year?" she asked, hoping that he would say yes. Marco smiled, feeling his heart skip a beat. "Of course," he replied. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." And so, they parted ways, with the promise of meeting again a year from then. As the year passed, Marco couldn't stop thinking about Isabella. He missed her more than he had anticipated, and couldn't wait to see her again. When the day finally arrived, he made his way to the fireworks festival, eagerly scanning the crowds for a glimpse of Isabella. And then, he saw her. She was more beautiful than ever, and his heart skipped a beat as he made his way towards her. As they met each other's gaze, they both felt a rush of emotions. Marco could see the sadness in Isabella's eyes, but he also saw something else, a glimmer of hope, perhaps. As the fireworks lit up the sky, Marco and Isabella smiled at each other, lost in their own thoughts. They didn't say anything, but they didn't need to. In that moment, they both knew that they had found something special, beyond the flickering flames that dance around them now. The Last Winter. Chapter 1. The Call of Winter. The snow-covered mountain loomed in the distance, casting a cold and eerie aura over the landscape. The wind howled, echoing across the barren terrain, as if warning all living creatures to stay away from its frozen grasp. It was winter in Tibet, a season that could make even the bravest of men tremble in fear. But there was one man who did not fear the winter, a man who had seen many winters in his long life. He was an old Tibetan monk, a wise and gentle soul, who had devoted his life to seeking enlightenment and spreading peace. He stood at the base of the mountain, his wrinkled face tilted upwards, as he gazed at the peak. For hours he stood there, lost in thought, memories of his past flooding his mind. He remembered the days when he was young, when he had walked these very same mountains with a spring in his step, and a song in his heart. He remembered the people he had met, the lessons he had learned, and the wisdom he had gained. The monk's contemplation deepened as he thought about the nature of existence. He realized that life was not just about living, but also about dying. Death was a natural part of the cycle of life, and he had come to accept it as such. He knew that his time in this world was limited, and that he had to make the most of it, while he could. As the sun began to set, the old monk knew it was time to make his way back to the monastery. He took one last look at the mountain, a sense of longing in his heart, before turning his back and trudging through the snow. Chapter 2: Memories of the Past. The old monk returned to the monastery, a place that had been his home for most of his life. It was a peaceful and quiet place, with walls made of stone, and roofs made of wood. The halls were lined with prayer wheels, which the monks spun as they walked, sending their prayers to the heavens. The old monk made his way to his small cell, a room barely big enough for him to stand in. But it was a place of solitude, a place where he could meditate and reflect on his life. As he sat down on his mat, the old monk closed his eyes and began to pray. His mind drifted back to his youth, to the days when he had first joined the monastery. He had been a restless and troubled young man, seeking answers to questions he couldn't even put into words. But then he had met his master, a wise and kind man, who had taken him under his wing. The old monk smiled as he remembered the lessons his master had taught him, the long hours of meditation, and the endless conversations they had shared. As he grew older, he started to understand the importance of living in the present and cherishing every moment. The memory of his master brought a sense of sadness to the old monk's heart. His master had passed away many years ago, leaving him alone to carry on his teachings. But he had never forgotten the lessons he had learned, and he had never lost his passion for seeking enlightenment. The old monk opened his eyes and took a deep breath. He knew that his time on this earth was limited, that he would not live to see another winter. He had seen so many people come and go in his life, and he knew that his time was coming soon. He didn't fear death, but he hoped that he had lived a life worth remembering. But he was at peace with this knowledge, for he had lived a full and meaningful life, and he knew that his teachings would live on long after he was gone. The old monk opened his eyes and looked out the window again. The snow had stopped falling, and the mountains looked peaceful. He knew that the memories of his lifetime would stay with him forever, and he was grateful for that. Chapter 3: The Ultimate Journey. The days had grown shorter, and the chill of winter was setting in. The old monk knew that his time on this earth was drawing to a close. He had spent his entire life in search of enlightenment, and now, as he sat in his humble abode, he knew that his ultimate journey was about to begin. He sat in silence, gazing out the window at the snow-capped mountains in the distance. The beauty of the landscape was breathtaking, and it filled him with a sense of peace. He knew that soon he would be leaving this world behind, but he felt no fear. He was ready. The old monk had been preparing for his final journey for months. He had written letters to his family and friends, saying his final goodbyes. He had also written a letter to his fellow monks, telling them to continue their work and keep the teachings alive. He tidied his small dwelling, carefully packing away his few possessions. He made arrangements for his funeral, ensuring that everything was in order for his departure. He had one final task to complete before he left. He had to climb the mountain one last time, and meditate on its peak. He knew it would be a difficult journey, but he was determined to complete it. He packed his bag with essentials and started his climb. The mountain was steep, and the snow made it even harder to climb. But he didn't give up. He kept going, one step at a time, until he reached the peak. He sat down and closed his eyes, meditating on the teachings he had learned over the years. He remembered the moments of joy, the moments of sadness, and the moments of reflection. He had lived a life worth remembering, and he was at peace with himself. As he opened his eyes, he saw a group of monks waiting for him at the bottom of the mountain. They had come to pay their respects and honor his final journey. He smiled at them, knowing that his legacy would live on through them. As the day of his departure drew near, the monk felt a sense of calm. He spent his last days in quiet contemplation, reflecting on his life and his journey. He felt a sense of gratitude for all that he had experienced, and he knew that his spirit would live on in the hearts and minds of those he had touched. Despite the solemnity of the situation, the monk felt a sense of joy. He had lived a long and fulfilling life, and he knew that he was leaving behind a legacy of wisdom and compassion. He had touched the lives of so many people, and he knew that his teachings would live on long after he was gone. The old monk took his last breath, surrounded by the beauty of the mountains and the teachings of the Buddha. As he closed his eyes for the last time, the monk felt at peace. Chapter 4: Legacy. The news of the old monk's passing spread quickly throughout the region, and soon people from all over came to pay their respects. They gathered in the small temple where the monk had spent so many years of his life, and they spoke of his wisdom and compassion. As they shared their memories and stories, the monk's legacy came to life. His teachings had touched so many lives, and his spirit lived on in the hearts of those who had known him. In the days that followed, people continued to come to the temple to honor the old monk's memory. They brought offerings of food and flowers, and they lit candles in his honor. The temple became a place of pilgrimage, a place where people could come to reflect and seek guidance. The old monk's legacy had touched so many lives, and it continued to do so long after his passing. As time passed, the memory of the old monk faded into legend, but his teachings continued to be passed down from generation to generation, and his spirit lived on in the hearts and minds of those who had known him. And so, the legacy of the old Tibetan monk continued to inspire and guide, reminding people of the power of wisdom, compassion, and the human spirit. His journey was over, but the ultimate journey was not the end, but the beginning. The Glasses. Chapter 1. The Lost Glasses. It was a dark and stormy night. The rain was falling in heavy sheets, and the wind was howling through the empty streets of the city. I was on my way home from work, but as I stepped out of the building, I realized that something was wrong. I couldn't see anything clearly. I rubbed my eyes, but it didn't help. Then I realized that I had lost my glasses. Panic set in as I tried to retrace my steps, but the rain was coming down so hard that I could barely keep my eyes open. I stumbled along the wet pavement, feeling my way with my hands, hoping to find my glasses. The city was a blur, and the people passing by looked like ghosts. I could hear their footsteps and their voices, but I couldn't see their faces. It was as if I had been transported to another world, a world where everything was distorted and confusing. As I walked on, my mind raced with thoughts of how I was going to make it home without my glasses. How would I cross the busy streets? How would I navigate the confusing maze of alleys and buildings that led to my apartment? I felt helpless and alone, lost in the darkness and rain. I stumbled and almost fell a few times, but I managed to keep going. The rain soaked through my clothes, and the cold wind chilled me to the bone. But I didn't care. All I wanted was to find my glasses and make it home safely. Chapter 2. A World of Shadows. The rain continued to fall relentlessly as I walked along, my eyes straining to see through the darkness. The world around me had turned into a world of shadows, where nothing was clear or defined. I could barely make out the outlines of buildings and people, and the colors of the world had faded away. The city that I knew so well had become a labyrinth of confusion and disorientation. I couldn't tell where I was or which way I was going. The familiar landmarks that I used to navigate had disappeared, and I was lost in a sea of shadows. As I walked on, my mind played tricks on me. I saw things that weren't there, and I heard sounds that weren't real. I stumbled over curbs and trash cans, and I bumped into people who shouted at me in anger. But I didn't give up. I kept walking, determined to find my glasses and make it home. And then, something strange happened. The world around me began to change. The shadows became less ominous, and the shapes more defined. The colors began to return, and the rain cleared away. I realized that my eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and I could see again. It wasn't perfect vision, but it was enough to make my way home. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, and I knew that I was going to be okay. Chapter 3: The Power of Perception. As I walked through the now clearer streets, I began to think about the power of perception. How our minds create our reality, and how our perception can shape our experiences. Without my glasses, the world had become a confusing and scary place. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, the world around me changed. I realized that perception was not just about sight, but about how we see the world in general. Our experiences are shaped by how we perceive them. A dark and stormy night can be frightening or beautiful, depending on how we choose to see it. I realize that we often take our senses for granted. We assume that what we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell is an accurate representation of reality. But the truth is, our senses are limited, and our perception of the world is subjective. As I continued to walk, I noticed how my other senses had heightened in the absence of my vision. The sound of the rain hitting the pavement became more distinct. The smell of freshly brewed coffee from a nearby cafe became more pronounced. I even began to feel the texture of the concrete beneath my feet. It was as if I had gained a new set of senses, and I was seeing the world in a completely different way. I began to appreciate the beauty in the small things that I had previously overlooked. I also realized that perception is not just about our physical senses, but about our mental state as well. Our thoughts, emotions, and beliefs can shape our perception of the world. A negative mindset can make even the most beautiful surroundings seem dull and uninteresting, while a positive mindset can make even the most mundane tasks seem enjoyable. As I pondered these thoughts, I came across a homeless man huddled under a cardboard box. Normally, I would have walked past without a second glance, but my newfound perception made me see him in a different light. I saw him as a human being with a story, a life, and struggles that I couldn't even imagine. I felt a sense of empathy and compassion that I had never felt before. It was a powerful realization, and one that I knew would stay with me even after I found my glasses. I continued to walk, taking in the world around me with a newfound appreciation for the power of perception. I realized that our perception can shape our reality, and that we have the power to choose how we see the world. Chapter 4: Embracing the Unknown. As I continued on my journey, I realized that sometimes in life, we have to embrace the unknown. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to it. Losing my glasses was an unexpected and uncomfortable experience, but it also forced me to see the world in a new way. I had to rely on my other senses and my intuition to navigate through the city. In a way, it was liberating. I didn't have to worry about how I looked or whether my glasses were smudged. I was able to experience the world in a different way, and it made me appreciate the beauty and complexity of life. I realized that sometimes we have to let go of our preconceptions and embrace the unknown. We have to trust that everything will work out in the end, even if we don't know exactly how. It's a scary but exhilarating feeling, and it reminded me of the importance of being open-minded and adventurous in life. The Red Moon. Chapter 1: The Red Moon observes the city. I am the red moon of the modern era hanging in the sky above the bustling city of Japan. From my vantage point, I observe the world below with a sense of detachment. I am not of this world, yet I am drawn to it, fascinated by the sights and sounds that unfold beneath me. The city pulses with life, a throbbing mass of humanity that flows through the streets like a river. Neon lights illuminate the buildings, casting a garish glow that clashes with the natural beauty of the night sky. Cars honk their horns, their headlights illuminating the road in front of them. People rush to and fro, their faces set in determined expressions as they go about their business. As I watch, a strange feeling washes over me. It is a sense of longing, a yearning to be a part of this world, to feel the rush of life pulsing through my veins. But I know that I can never be a part of it, that I am destined to remain a distant observer, forever separate from the world below. And yet there is something else that draws me to this place. Something that I cannot quite put my finger on. It is a sense of possibility, of potential, of the unknown. For even though I have seen this city 1,000 times before, it is never quite the same. There is always something new to discover, some hidden corner of the world that has yet to reveal itself to me. As I continue to watch, my eyes are drawn to a small figure in the distance. It is a girl walking alone on the street below. There is something about her that catches my attention, a sense of innocence and wonder that seems to emanate from her very being. Chapter 2: The Strange Gaze. I gazed down at the bustling city of Tokyo below me. The streets were filled with people, all hurrying along on their daily routines, oblivious to my watchful eye. But then, something caught my attention. A little girl, standing in the midst of the crowd, was looking up at me with a curious expression on her face. I had seen many humans look up at me over the years, but there was something different about her gaze. It was as if she could see right through me, as if she knew my deepest secrets and desires. I tried to look away, to ignore her probing stare, but I couldn't help but feel drawn to her. As the sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of red, the girl's gaze never wavered. She seemed to be waiting for something, or perhaps someone. I couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking, what she saw when she looked up at me with those piercing eyes. Hours passed, and the girl remained in the same spot, her gaze fixed upon me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was some sort of connection between us, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Finally, as the night grew darker and the city began to quiet down, the girl turned and walked away. I watched her disappear into the crowd, feeling a strange sense of loss as she left my sight. But even as she vanished from view, I knew that her gaze had left an indelible mark on me. Chapter 3: A Strange Connection. I do not know when it started, but I feel a strange connection to the girl. It is as if something is pulling me towards her, and I cannot resist it. Every time she is near me, I feel a strange energy emanating from her. At first, I did not understand what was happening to me. I have observed countless humans throughout my existence, but I have never felt this way towards any of them. I have always been an observer, a silent witness to the world's events. But now, I feel like I am part of it. I have never felt the need to interact with humans before, but now, I find myself drawn to her. I do not know what this connection means or why it exists, but I do not crave the reason. It is enough to feel something new, something different. As I observe her, I see that she is growing into a remarkable woman. She has a fire within her, a determination that drives her forward. I admire her strength and resilience, and I want to see her succeed. I cannot help but feel connected to her, like our fates are intertwined. I do not know what the future holds for us, but I am certain that our paths will cross again. And when they do, I will be ready to embrace this strange connection, no matter where it may lead. Chapter 4: Confessions Under the Red Moon. The red moon watched as the girl approached. She was no longer the innocent child he had seen before, but a grown woman with a look of longing in her eyes. As she gazed up at the moon, she spoke in a soft voice. "I remember when I first saw you, Red Moon. I was just a child, playing outside in the dark. You were so big and bright, and I couldn't take my eyes off of you. I felt like you were watching over me, like I was safe under your light." The red moon listened intently, feeling a sense of familiarity with the girl's words. He remembered her from that night, when she had looked at him with such wonder and innocence. As I grew older, I never forgot about that night. Whenever I felt scared or alone, I would look up at the sky and search for you. Even now, as an adult, I still feel that connection to you. It's like you understand me in a way that no one else can. The Red Moon was touched by the girl's confession, feeling a sense of responsibility towards her. He had never realized that his light could have such an impact on someone's life. I may not know why I feel this way, Red Moon, but I hope you'll continue to shine your light and watch over me. You've been a constant presence in my life, and I don't know what I would do without you. Chapter 5 Echoes of the Confession. As the girl finished her confession, the Red Moon remained silent, taking in everything she had said. He could feel the sincerity and purity of her emotions, which resonated deeply within him. For a moment, the Red Moon was lost in thought, trying to make sense of the girl's words and the emotions that had been revealed. He could see how much the girl had grown and matured, and he was touched by her honesty and openness. As he looked down at the girl, he felt a sense of protectiveness and affection. He wanted to reach out and comfort her, to let her know that she was not alone, and that he understood how she felt. The Red Moon realized that the bond he had felt with the girl had grown stronger. It was not a romantic or physical attraction, but rather a deep and profound connection that went beyond the boundaries of space and time. He was grateful for the girl's confession and for the opportunity to listen to her heart. He knew that it was not easy to open up to someone and bare one's soul, and he felt privileged to be able to share in her emotions. As the Red Moon contemplated the girl's confession, he could feel a sense of peace and tranquility washing over him. He realized that the girl had given him a gift, a glimpse into the human heart and the complexity of human emotions. With a sense of gratitude and humility, the Red Moon looked down at the girl and whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for sharing your heart with me. I will remember this moment forever."